I moved to share some more Dharma kind of as a extension of what I was talking about last week. And we had a nice sharing. And I think there were some provocations in what I was saying. I know there were, and those came up later in the discussion we had. And also I had several people come to me in Dokusan, and we had a rich conversation with several people, two or three, about some of the things that came up in my talk last week. So I want to extend those comments. For those who weren't there, and I'll get back into it, but for those who weren't there, it was about the importance of having a spiritual practice, the importance of having a spiritual practice, the gift of a spiritual practice, the challenge of a spiritual practice, and then how we experience life without a spiritual practice. And I think that last one maybe is one that sort of was an edge for some people. And I'll clarify kind of what I meant with some of the things that I said. But I want to start with sharing something that's been very alive for me in my life and in my work for the last few months. And it relates, it relates to this. As many of you know, I've been working professionally for the last few years to put together a mindfulness venture, a mindfulness platform. It began originally as a mindfulness app that we were going to bring into the workplace, into enterprises, similar to Calm or Headspace or Insight Timer. And it has evolved in recent months into a more broad-based offering over online channels, producing content and guided meditations and classes. And we just launched our first class last night. So this is very up for me. I've been putting a lot of work into this really over the last 2 years, but especially on this content side over the last few months. We decided to pursue this channel of classes and online content back at the beginning of September. And the first kind of phase of that, the initial phase of that, is coming to fruition right now. And I launched what's a 4-session class series, 2 hours a piece, on transforming your relationship with time. So I'm happy to share the details with the whole Sangha. We can put the links out, and you can check it out. But what this venture is that I've been working on, my partner is Chris Panos, who's a successor of Bernie Roshi, and he's on the board of the Zen Peacemaker International. So he's Shoen's boss in that capacity. And he is also on the board of directors of the Zen Caregiving Project, formerly the Zen Hospice Project. So they're, as many of you perhaps know, established in the 80s during the AIDS epidemic in San Francisco, and created a form of hospice that was entirely informed by Zen principles and practices to truly bear witness to those who are dying, and to hold space for a true transformation for both the person who's dying as well as the caregivers who are present to that process. And over the decades since then, they've built out a very rich practice, at their facility in San Francisco, but also a very rich set of trainings into how people can learn how to do mindful caregiving. Okay, Zen, you could say Zen-based caregiving, or they call it contemplative caregiving. There was the desire, and there still is the desire for that organization to move their mindful caregiving training out into the world in a bigger way, and not just limit it to people who could kind of come to their facility and do a series of sessions, at their place in San Francisco, but to put out the trainings more widely. But they did a lot of market research and a lot of surveying, and they talked to a lot of people. And what they discovered is that people who are doing that work in their lives. So they're taking care of elderly and dying relatives in their homes, perhaps. So they're not professional caregivers. They're just caregivers because that's part of their life. They don't identify in that way. So they don't seek out resources for that because they don't think of themselves that way. And as a consequence, they kind of struggle to find resource, to find support, and certainly to engage in a kind of a training that might help them in that way. So Chris's insight was to, well, let's bring this wisdom to people, but let's bring it to, where they are right now and where they are willing to get help. And that was the corporate America. It was the business world. It's modern working professionals. And let's bring this to them, 50 million of whom in the US alone are taking care of elderly and dying relatives and friends. So literally, a huge portion of the working population is actually doing that at home, specifically caregiving in that context, the formal caregiving context. But everybody else is caregiving in a more broad context. They're taking care of their own families, they're taking care of their work, they're taking care of themselves. And the trainings and the practices that come out of Zen caregiving project, and I should say these are our practices. This is Zen, these are Zen practices. So it just happens to be oriented toward contexts where you're specifically taking care of something that's right in front of you. That's where the specificity comes in. But to create a platform of support resources, trainings, classes, etc., that really meet people in their everyday life with all of the things that they're taking care of. So that was the inspiration for the venture. And we spent a long time working on an app to offer these out as an app and bring the app into organizations that would subscribe to the app. And we ran into some roadblocks and slowdowns with respect to some partnerships and respect to some fundraising around that. So I've been engaged with that. And then we made this shift a few months ago into this online platform. So we're launching that, and I'm sharing that mostly because I'm really excited about it. And I think you might find some interest in it, and you might share it with others. But also because it's right in the center of my own work to how to help people help themselves, how to help them discover themselves, how to help them be truly present to their life in a way that is non-reactive and doesn't cause suffering, but is more engaged and more meaningful and purposeful in their own lives. So with this, teachings and trainings that I'm offering through the app and through this system, do I expect people to, is it a spiritual path for them? Well, no, it isn't. And do I expect them to have the types of breakthroughs and transformations that we experience in our Zen practice? No, I don't. My goals are much more modest with respect to that work. And people's expectations, need to be adjusted accordingly, what they're going to get out of these things. So what do we get out of the spiritual path? That's the topic from last week. I think the part that provoked a few people or stimulated a few people was me saying that, we, meaning those engaged in a serious spiritual path, are something of an elite. I don't think I used that word, but I said we're kind of at the upper echelons of spiritual warriorship, I think is the term I used. And I think, some people took that to mean that like I was better, that we're better than anyone who isn't engaging in that. And I definitely don't mean that. I don't mean that at all. We're not better. And I'll say more about that. The other thing that I think provoked people was I said, without a spiritual practice, life doesn't work. And there were some questions about that. And I want to explain kind of how I meant by that, because I think several people brought up, well, I know people who don't have a spiritual practice and their life seems to be working really well. You know, they're compassionate, they're generous, they're functioning as far as, you know, we can tell. So I don't get it. You know, what do you mean? Yeah, they don't have it, but it's not working. So those are the two kind of doorways that I want to explore a little bit more, you know, today. What I mean by I don't think life works without a spiritual practice. Some people translate or understand the first noble truth, right? Life is dukkha, the truth of dukkha. So I've had Dharma brothers who translate that as, Dharma brothers in this case, that life is out of joint. Right? You know, most people translate it, the traditional translation of dukkha is suffering, so life is suffering. My preferred translation is insufficiency. You know, we experience life as insufficient, moment to moment. But this person translated it as out of joint. So this is what I mean by life doesn't work, is really the first noble truth. Okay, that it's dukkha. Out of joint. Okay, there's something that doesn't quite work when we experience ourselves as an independent being that is kind of, in a sense, consuming the world or transactionally relating to the world and to other people. Okay, that we have things, that we have qualities, even that we have sensations, or that we have experiences, right? Right at the core level, there's a framework for our lives, which is that there's something here that is having all these things. And there's everything problematic that Buddhism identifies sort of comes from this framework that we have. Well, I have this and I want more of it. Or I have this and I don't want to lose it. Or I have this and I don't want it, so I want to not have it. Our orientation to this having framework is what gives rise to the three poisons, okay, which is the second noble truth of attachment, which is the cause of the suffering. Okay, we want more, we want less, we push something away, or we're just ignorant and indifferent and cut off from things, people, sensations. The fundamental framework is out of joint. Okay, whenever we're involved in that dynamic and we understand ourselves that way, things ultimately, you know, don't work. They don't work. I talked about the three seals of Buddhism, you know, impermanence, which also you can take that to emptiness too, impermanence and emptiness, and no self, and then dukkha or nirvana, right? So impermanence or emptiness, it's the nature, you know, it's the nature of reality. So if we're not in accord with the nature of reality, that things are always changing. Moment to moment, they're always changing. In fact, there's no things to change because everything is change. right? So we can't even say, well, here's a thing, and then it changes the next moment, because it's never, ever, ever fixed. That's taking it all the way to the emptiness level. There's nothing fixed, ever. Nothing fixed in the world, nothing fixed in our experience, and nothing fixed in ourselves. But it bears introspection to, look at how alive is this truth for you in your life. Right? You can have an idea that things are going to change, right? But to actually be immersed in the change, so that your reactive patterns, don't come up so strongly around the thingness of things. That's a long-term process to unwind those reactive patterns. So if you look at yourself, if you look at yourself and say, well, how alive is this truth, in my life? Am I really living from this truth? Am I really appreciating, one thing that there are things that come up when we are living from that truth of impermanence, and several people spoke quite eloquently about it last session, that gratitude comes up when we are connected to things, to the impermanence of people and things. Gratitude arises very naturally towards them. When we're connected to our interdependence of things, our interbeing, as Thich Nhat Hanh put it, when we really experience the interbeing of things, a lot of gratitude comes up. And because that other person is us, or even the stairs are us, or the pot is us. Thich Nhat Hanh talked about these first two seals, impermanence, emptiness, and no self, as impermanence and emptiness is non-fixity in time, and no self is non-fixity in space. It's an interesting way, I thought, to look at it, right? Nothing is ever fixed in time, it's always changing. And then no self is like, well, there's no boundaries around anything in space. We're all interbeing. Nothing is fixed and closed off. So when we experience these things, then that gratitude arises, that compassion arises, a clarity and clear seeing that we call wisdom arises, because we can see what's going on perhaps with somebody else more deeply when we are connected with them in that way. And I'll ask you, do you experience all of those things more richly and more deeply in your spiritual practice? Does your spiritual practice lead you to experience those things more deeply? Unquestionably, for me, the answer is yes. And that's why, for me, the thing in my early years of practice that really just made it unquestionable that I would continue is that, I would do a retreat and I would just say, well, this is reality. I'm living in reality now. It is more painful in some ways, more scary, stronger emotions. But this is reality. There was no question in my mind. And then as I experienced my obscurations, coming back after a long retreat, and my ideas and my anxieties and my fixations, and they would kind of subtly start to come back. I could tell, there's veils, there's clouds. I'm not in reality here. I mean, my experience was real. It doesn't mean that phenomenologically there was the truth of my experience, but it wasn't expansive. It wasn't clear. It wasn't connected. So I think I know the answer about whether you experience it more or when you practice more, because that's what practice is all about. It's to be in reality in that way, and to experience ourselves in that way. The spiritual life is to, it recognizes that this is not a simple matter. It it takes a kind of a 360 approach, a full approach to all aspects of your life. It's not something you can just do, for a certain period of time a day and then kind of go back to a some kind of normal or other way of functioning, and then expect it to bear fruit for you. We all start with something like that, right? And then it becomes more and more the center of our life. But it has to encompass your whole life. And that's why what I was referring to when I say a spiritual practice, those who have we need a spiritual practice in order for life to work. I mean, our Buddhist language is the Eightfold Path, right? Which is the fourth noble truth, the Eightfold Path. So the Buddha identified quite, nicely, right. He called him right. I don't know what the Sanskrit word was that's translated as right, but, right view, intention, speech, action, livelihood, understanding, meditation, and concentration, right? Those eight paths, connected, parallel, intermingled paths through which the whole life, deepens in reality and opens the heart mind. And this happens, it happens over time. I remember reading one of the commentaries in one of the koans as I was working through them early, and and I'm forgetting what teacher it is who did this commentary, and he said the Zen path is about character building. And I remember not liking that phrase. It's like, I'm not doing character building here. I'm looking for something, deeper than that. But as I've matured in my practice, I've actually come to like that description of Zen practice. It's a life practice to really to take all aspects of our life in, and there's actually, it's a transformation of the character. It's a transformation of our character. It isn't like we completely lose our personality and then somehow we're this brilliant new being, all lovey-dovey and wise. It's not that at all. But nor is it remaining kind of stuck in a certain understanding of yourself, a certain kind of set of, habits and programs working with you. It isn't that. It's a transformation of your self-understanding, so that all of that just experientially for you becomes, in a sense, turned inside out. And now you're living as that, not inside of it. Really live as yourself. And that just takes doing. It takes doing. It takes time. It takes commitment. It takes a lot of compassion for yourself and for other beings, a gentle approach, a forgiving approach to yourself and others, to join with other like-minded people, and to walk the walk and show up every day, every week, every month in your path and in your practice. And there's a real surrender that's needed for all spiritual practices. A real surrender, an inner kind of leap to say, all right, I'm not going to continue with the control mechanisms that I've been working on, that I've been deploying, my whole life. I'm going to work on my reactive patterns, and I'm not going to just go on autopilot with those. I'm going to let go of my need for control, of my need for things to be the way I want them to be. I'm going to let go of those things. I'm going to surrender that and enter into an attitude of, okay, what's here? Witness. Let me witness what is here. And this can be at a deep level, a deep heart level. When we go deep in our zazen, who am I? You may find that you didn't choose the Buddha chooses you. You see what speaks to you in the silence of your zazen at a deeper level than all the voices that move through your mind. Right? See what meets you there. So people can have very functional lives, and they can be very compassionate and very generous and very functional by whatever definition, by certain definitions, definitely. And there's nothing worse about a life that isn't dedicated to surrender and spiritual practice. There's nothing worse about it. And to be dedicated to a spiritual life and to have a dedicated spiritual practice, I believe it's something that the world needs more and more of. It always needs more and more of. And the depth of participation with reality is there for those who are able to commit to a spiritual practice. Thank you.